Hi, this is Dr. Mike, and for our final lecture in this series, I want to end up talking about some of the global challenges, some of the local responses, and the role of anthropology in our success as human beings. Most of the people on the planet, we now have over 5.05 billion people on this planet. We pretty much today take for granted that we can slip into cyberspace, we can connect with others regardless of where they are in the world, thanks to electronics and fiber optics and digital telecommunications technology. Most of you don't even think about the fact that even 10 years ago, you would not be able to take a class online or have a cell phone. I mean, I lived through all of those things, from the putting in of a desktop computer in the first computer lab in a local school in my county. I was responsible for that. I had the first bag phone before there was a cell phone. So even at my old age, I have lived through most of the technological changes. And we do what some people call technological somnambulism. You know what somnambulism is? It's sleepwalking. We sleepwalk through the technology without realizing what it's actually doing to us, or we hope that it's not doing anything to us, that it's changing the way that we do things. If you don't believe that you are caught up in the technology, why don't you leave your cell phone at home one day and go off without it and see how desperately you are tested during the day to communicate or to do the things that you normally do. Think about what's in outer space today. Now, I have, again, lived through most of the history. I was alive when Jack Kennedy, the president, challenged us to put a man on the moon. We barely had anything in space at that point in time in the way of satellites or space stations. That was not even a twinkle in some scientist's mind. And yet we today have over 1,300 operational satellites orbiting the Earth, and they revolve between 160 and 35,786 kilometers above the ocean surface. About half of these are designated specifically for just telecommunications. Others serve military purposes, scientific purposes, weather forecasting. We have 50 global positioning devices in the outer space. So the question that we want to think about a little bit is what we're doing with this environment, this world that we live in. There's a lot of space junk up there. There are constantly satellites falling out of orbit. Lucky for us, they either land somewhere in the ocean, which covers most of the surface of the Earth, or they burn up in their re-entry, so they don't pose quite that many challenges, but they will one day. Think about the space station. If it ever fell out of the air, that thing is as big as a city, and we could pose all kinds of problems. But ever since man has been on the planet, we have exerted our influences on the environment and brought about environmental changes that we're not that we don't even think about. And humans in the Industrial Revolution upped the ante as far as that was concerned. The things that we do in the taking of natural resources. I told you that my office window overlooks Pikes Peak here in Colorado, and there's this huge gaping scar in the side of the mountain where miners fully intended to take down the entire mountain range to get at the copper and other minerals in the mountain range. So we're always doing something to our world, and now that has become much more serious. We have tried to deny global warming. Our president denies global warming, and yet if you're half awake, you realize that there's something going on with our environment, with the water levels rising, with storms coming, and we can sit here and we can deny that all day long. That doesn't change the fact that if it happens, we're going to be in great trouble. If water levels rise to the level they expect them to rise, over 1 billion people on this earth will be displaced and be forced to move inland, which makes everybody more crowded, more challenged, and all these things. So technology, industrial revolution, the things that we did to the planet are having already an effect. We live in a global culture today. Have you thought about the fact that you can go anywhere in the world and eat a McDonald's hamburger? You can go anywhere in the world and find, Wendy's. I was in the Philippines in 1985. Got the worst case of food poisoning I've ever had at a Wendy's restaurant chain. So they're everywhere. McDonald's. I was in Israel 11 times, and they have a McDavid, which is their version of McDonald's. And so it's just quite interesting to think about how interconnected we are. Everybody knows Apple computers. They all have iPhones. We have all these great toys that we share. So we live in a global culture. We no longer can say, that we're going to be a country to ourselves. We have interconnecting trade. We have big deals going on with tariffs and things right now that will affect that. And we live in a world that is multicultural. The public policy for managing multicultural diversity in a multi-ethnic society is difficult, and there's a lot of things that go into that. How do we live together with people that are different color, that have a different language, that have different culture and traditions? We cannot go back. How would you go back? We have people in the 1800s called nativists. We still have a lot of those people around who think they want to go back to a culture where it's just Americans. What's really funny about that was that in the 1800s they wanted to get rid of Native Americans, who were the original owners and settlers of this land, and only wanted America for Americans, and they want to get rid of Native Americans. That shows you the hypocrisy of the ways that we think, that everybody here is not American somehow because their skin colors differ, because they came in later than others. Folks, we're all migrants or immigrants. We all came here from somewhere. And even our Native American ancestry, they came over the Bering Strait from Eurasia. We've now proven that with DNA markings that they are literally cousins of the people that live in Asia. So they came over. So all of us are immigrants, and we need to learn that. We have to work on how to get along. How do you live in a multicultural society, give people the maximum amount of freedom, and allow them to be who they want to be without impeding on somebody else? Officially, how do we stress mutual respect and tolerance for cultural differences within our country's borders? Those are issues that we face today. And so anthropology deals with that. This course is very, very apropos for the day that we live in, because we see how vitally important it is. We have people always on the move in this country and other countries. You think about countries that are facing civil war, they're facing food shortages and all these things, and they move. You realize how many hundreds of thousands of people in this world live in refugee camps? I think of the Palestinians on the West Bank of Israel. They have been there since 1948, living in slummy conditions, without good water, without food, without jobs. Think of that, 1948. It's not going to be that long before they have been there 100 years. There are thousands of displaced people in Syria, in Somalia. The largest refugee camp in the world is in Somalia. These people get displaced by global changes, by changes of government, by changes of politics. All these things will force them out. Suddenly, maybe their religion is not accepted, or their traditions, or their ethnicities. Just a few years ago, we had a genocide in Africa where the Tutsis and the other tribes killed an entire race of people and wiped them out because they didn't like their traditions and their languages. So there's always migration, mobility in geographic space involving temporary and permanent change in a place of residence. You and I in America are blessed because we don't have those forces. But my question is how little it would take for those things to happen here. we take for granted just because something has always been a certain way that it will continue to be. But we're not immune to changes in geography, changes in weather, and all these other things. And it's important for us to think about that as we close out this course. So migration, moving around within countries, external migration is movement to a foreign country or immigration. People, you realize in America that people don't die trying to get out of here, but there are a lot of people who die trying to get in, which says something to us about what a great blessing we have to be here. But you know, it doesn't take a lot of turmoil and things to create the same thing within our own country. There's a term called xenophobia, which means a fear or hatred of strangers or anything foreign. There's some people that just don't like anybody different than themselves, and that's a real problem. Nativism, as I've said, feeling like we're the greatest, only our stuff is worth having, or you know, we don't want these people coming in, living in our country on our turf. But we have to remember our history when we make statements like that. There's a lot of things about structural power at the macro level that manages and restructures political and economic relations within societies. You realize that things go on in our government, sometimes unnoticed, that have great, large effects on people and how they change and how they're dealt with. They shape and change people's ideology. You cannot change people. You cannot force people to believe like you do. You cannot force people to have the values that you have. And so it gets more and more difficult as we get larger and larger to make people live together, work together in some kind of harmony. So these macro level things, they're things that are, as I often say, outside my pay grade. I can't really control who's the President of the United States, who's the Vice President. All I can do is at a voting level is to vote my convictions, but then I have to accept the will of the majority in moving forward. There's a lot of violence in this world. Even this weekend we've had two massive shootings, one in Texas and one in Dayton, Ohio. That's becoming more and more prevalent, and yet we resist any kind of change to gun laws or whatever, and you know, always the excuse, well, it's the person that does the killing, not the gun. But you go and look in the countries that have stricter gun laws, and you realize they don't have mass shootings. But there is that lack of will to deal with things, and that's increases violence. And it's more than just physical violence, psychological violence, repression, environmental destruction, poverty, hunger, illness, premature deaths. The rate of hunger is on the rise even in our country. That's a world problem that we should have solved years ago. Do you realize how much of the world's budget goes to wars and military? In America, over 55% of our federal budget goes to the military. What could we do with that money if we'd stop fighting and killing? How many people could we feed? How many people could we send to college? And yet that becomes a larger and larger. Dwight Eisenhower, when he was president in the 1950s, warned us about the military-industrial complex growing more and more until it swallows up our entire budget and we have nothing else to do anything with as a people. Pollution, global warming, hunger, energy consumption. If the entire world consumed energy at the same rate as the United States, we wouldn't have any energy. We have other massive countries. India has over 1 billion people. China has over 1 billion people. They are rapidly reaching the same technological level as we are in America. What's going to happen when they begin to, I mean, they already do that with crude oil. They siphon off any extra that's on the market, which pushes the price up and makes gasoline go up. So as we conclude this course and look at these final chapters, it's important that we look at these different aspects in considering the global challenges. Human beings have some great challenges ahead of them as to whether we survive as a people or not. It's not a given that humanity will survive. If the planet does change, we have global warming, we may see some very trying situations in the days to come to our very survival. So it's important for us to know these things. I hope you've enjoyed the class, and I hope that you will take away some things that will make you think about the future and be a better world citizen and a better human being, which is what we all should be doing. Thank you.